Hello, everyone. It's me, David Chen from Decoding TV, here with a special bonus episode to discuss the 2025 Emmy Awards. They literally just concluded minutes ago. And so we're here today to react to what we saw, both in terms of the awards as well as the ceremony itself. Joining me today is the only person that I could possibly think of to discuss this with. He is not only a television expert, but an expert on this specific award ceremony. Myles McNutt from Episodic Medium, thanks for chatting with me today.
I am, as always, thrilled to talk about anything with you, Dave, obviously. But admittedly, the Emmys are maybe my favorite.
So thrilled to have you, Myles, and there is a lot to discuss. So why don't we start with just overall thoughts? Let's start with the awards themselves, and then move on. Or actually, no, let's do the telecast first, and then do the awards. Okay, so telecast is the more raw, visceral thing we just witnessed, and then the awards is kind of like the bigger picture stuff. In terms of the telecast itself, what did you think, Myles McNutt?
Terrible. It was bad. I mean, and the thing about it is, so to understand, I was just noodling and writing about this a little bit as I prepare to post something on the newsletter tomorrow. And one of the things I think is so interesting about it is okay, I I don't know what a real person thinks of the Emmy Awards. I know what TV fans think. I know what people who watch TV religiously connect with it, engage with it, and really focus on what's going on. And I know that those people want an award show that celebrates that and engages with that. And do you know where that's most celebrated? It's in the speeches. It's in the people who win, who get to talk about what that means and to reflect on the amazing work that they did. And when you build an entire award show telecast about policing and shaming the winners of those awards. And that is your entire bit. There is no additional level to the bit. There is no other bit. There is just nothing but that singular bit. It's just watching it go across my Blue Sky feed as clearly just getting worse and worse and more hated makes me feel okay, my Blue Sky feed is all people who love TV. Are the people at home who just want to see celebrities who are fans of Nate Bargatze, are those people hey, this is a fun bit because I don't watch any of those shows and I just want to see things play out? I have to think even those people didn't care for it. It just reflected to me beyond whether the moral reprehensibility of it, all those things, it just felt bad. It did not feel good, and it felt counter to what I was watching the Emmys for. And I don't know if I've seen an award show where the structure, the hosting structure, felt so oppositional to the very premise of the evening, even though I'll acknowledge that for many people watching it might be. So no, I think from that perspective as a telecast, just bad vibes. The vibes were bad. That's the simplest way to put it.
Right before we started broadcasting, I saw this thread post on Meta's Threads from MK Markowitz, who said, "For the Emmys writers to keep sending Nate Bargatze out with nothing but a tote board is WGA malpractice. The sitcom writer's slang term for this is a Nakamura. The story is that the Bob Newhart show had a joke about a Nakamura tape recorder that died, and the writers knew there were a lot of Nakamura jokes to come, and they would surely die too. You don't go all in like this. It's unprofessional." End quote. Meaning, you don't go all in on one joke, because if the joke doesn't do well, you are screwed. And it seemed like it did fine in the room, to be fair, Myles, right? It seemed like in the room, people weren't too upset about it. But at home, it was not only unfunny, at times it felt very uncomfortable. We all know probably at the end of the ceremony, everything's going to be fine for the Boys and Girls Club. And no one is suspecting that they're going to screw the Boys and Girls Club out of money or things like that. But to the idea of celebrities in doing the thing that the Emmys are supposed to do, which is make you emotional, make you speak eloquently, hopefully, about the things that you're passionate about, to speak about the people in your life that you're passionate about, that the Emmys would then penalize that behavior. Again, they didn't actually penalize it, but just the idea that they're dangling that carrot as the idea to penalize that behavior, not great. Not great. Did not feel good. Did not feel good. Now, that said, Myles, I am in support of shortening those speeches. I do think a lot of people go on way too long. And most of the time, it's a list of names. Most of the times, what people say is pretty uninteresting. But not like this, Myles. Not like this. That's
Well,
my
well,
conclusion.
I mean, I think the biggest problem at the end of the day is that, like, okay, for certain speeches to come along, it's like we would have all hooked Adrian Brody off the Oscar stage earlier this year, right? Like,
Yes.
I don't think there's a single person watching that who wouldn't have made that call. But it's like no one's going to interrupt Stephen Colbert, right? As he's up
Right.
there, sort of having this moment, eulogizing the very idea of late night television and his position therein after CBS is firing. Like, nobody's going to stop him. So why make it seem as though that carries those stakes? And it's like, look, we could say that the goal of shortening speeches. I posted about this, but it's now been 19 years since this happened. But when Conan O'Brien, who did such a great job at the Oscars, and I do think has made other people hosting this year look worse by nature of how well he handled the ebbs and flows of it. But when he hosted the Emmys, he quite famously put Bob Newhart in a sealed container with only 3 hours of air, threatening they would only let him out when the show was over. And it's like, that is a bit they kept coming back to. They kept showing Bob Newhart in thing, but like the joke ultimately was so clearly a joke. There were no
Right.
stakes. It was established the stakes was Bob
They're
Newhart
not going to
dying.
kill Bob Newhart
No,
live on the air.
right. And even though we know
Probably.
that's the case, we know that's the case with the money, don't get me wrong, but just sort of like the way it became, like, it infected the speeches. As the speeches started talking about it, and it's like obviously a couple of them, like, Seth Rogen, John Oliver, both were sort of like, F you, Nate, we're screwing you over. And that gave them little bits for, admittedly, I don't need to hear John Oliver say another word at the Emmys. I have heard him give enough speeches that, like, I'm fine, let it be bits all day. That's perfectly fine. That's good. But like in other cases, it felt like, Hannah Einbinder gets up there and, like, she wants to make a political statement at the end of her speech. And she's like, I'll pay for it. Like, we shouldn't be turning this into a capitalist enterprise, right? Like, why are we like treating this as though we need to like buy time to make those kinds of acknowledgments? And, somebody, I was saying in Blue Sky, people were sort of speculating that, like, oh, well, CBS wants to shorten the speeches so people don't get too political. And I'm like, that sounds like a conspiracy theory I don't think there's much kind of room for. I think in general, shorter speeches are enough of a discourse across every award show that this doesn't need that to be true. But there's no question that it did turn what should be a sort of like moment and process into, you know, what felt very transactional. And I don't think that that is a way to solve the problem that they're addressing and acknowledging that I agree is real. It just felt like a fundamental misfire. And again, to your point, how do you not abandon it halfway through? Right? Like, think about how many award shows where the host disappears, right? Like, you'll see them at the beginning, they're
Yeah.
coming out regularly, and then all of a sudden, midway through, they stop appearing because they're getting cut bits for time and keeping things moving. No, they kept coming out. They kept calling attention to it. Like, you could have just said at some point, you know what, we're just gonna let it be what it is and reveal it at the end. They
Right.
could have done all those things and chose to keep coming back to it. And it completely sold Nate Bargatze out, who, admittedly, I will say, did a terrible job hosting. And I mean the hosting here in the very literal sense of like being able to read a teleprompter and being able to successfully transition between moments. He seemed nervous. He was stumbling over words. He didn't say Gilmore Girls correctly. Like, this is someone
Apparently
who
that
I
was a long
think
running. Apparently that was a long running bit, is my understanding of the Gilmore Girls thing. But I sorry, finish what you're saying, then I'll chime in.
I just feel like, given all of that, it is a great example of, just a case where whatever they were trying to accomplish with him, it didn't mesh with the actual show itself and what its function was. And I think that's unfortunate, given that, there's lots of people who I think could have just done the job. Or do we need a host? All meaningful questions that this year's ceremony asked for us.
Yeah. I want to join you in agreeing that the hosting was pretty rough on this one. The way I would describe it is low energy. And there was not much going on, just at all. We talked about how they kept coming to the bit after every Nate Bargatze got on stage. It was like, yeah, look at the big number on the board. That was it. Like, it's not like it was that plus other stuff that was bad or other stuff that was good. That was the whole thing. There was virtually nothing else as far as it goes. No, it's not like there wasn't nothing else. He did a kind of SNL level quality sketch at the beginning of the ceremony, but the opening monologue, not great. And then it's mind blowing. I don't understand like what the conception was for this, right? What were they imagining? How are they imagining how this would go? Oh yes, it's gonna be hilarious. We're just gonna milk this thing for all it's worth, and the crowd's gonna go wild every single time. It's like even it's like hard for me to imagine what the kind of platonic ideal of this ceremony would have been. You know what I'm saying?
Well, I mean, it's hard too, because like the thing about Nate Bargatze, and this is why his choice as host is sort of challenging, is like he is not a late night host. He is not a celebrity oriented comedian. He tells jokes about normal life and normal person things. That's not really his angle. And so I think the choice to do an SNL sketch, which is pulling off of the George Washington ones that he's done on SNL in the same style, Phil Farnsworth, like that to me
Yeah.
is like a smart way of using what he does, finding a way of commentary. I do agree with the people on Blue Sky that like some of those jokes about like the History Channel being about aliens feel like they're a good 20 years old. And like I feel like it would actually be a really good teaching tool for those who don't know. I'm a professor, and I was thinking it's like this is teaching people about broadcasting cable things that my students don't understand. Like they truly do not know what these things are, right? And so like it isn't a like meaningful history lesson. But when he goes out, like you notice there really wasn't a traditional monologue. He was just explaining the boys and girls bit. And I'm wondering if they gave him that bit because it was sort of like, in a way, separating him from the celebrity culture, right? That
Mm,
he was sort of oppositional to the nature of the event and those dynamics. But it's like he can't truly be oppositional. Maybe the best joke for me and around that bad bit, bad as it was when he sort of commented where it's like people have asked, are we policing the presenters? Right. And kicking off for that. And he's like, no, we're only going to punish the people who have worked the hardest to get here. And I thought that was like, there's an acidic bite to that I
mhm.
appreciated, but it's like, it doesn't work as an ongoing bit, right? Like
Yeah.
there can be a joke about it. And that's why if they had set that up at the beginning and said, we'll check back in at the end of the broadcast,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
not just constantly kept updating it, right? If they had just treated it that way, it could have sort of been like I ultimately look, if I look back at it, how differently would we be talking about it if they hadn't put the number going down on the screen as the speech was ending? Right? Because it's one thing to send Bargatze out to be like, the
Right.
number went down. And
Right.
it's another to call attention to it independent of that. That to me is sort of like, if I'm looking at a production decision that like could have maybe shifted some of how we're talking about it, that would be the one. And I don't know how you defend that. I really don't know how you defend that.
It feels gross, you know. It just feels oh, the celebrity talking. And by the way, experiencing an emotional moment, whatever, is taking money away from the kids. I know that's not what actually happened. I know like the kids got the money at the end, but just like they're trying to create a spectacle out of that. Feels bad. And you know, your what you just said, Miles, brings up the possibility that maybe they tried to do other stuff and it just didn't work. And so they just said, "Hey," because at the end they show here's who wrote the ceremony, and there's something along the lines of 12 people, 12 writers, and it's like it's hard for me to believe that 12 writers came up with what we saw in terms of the hosting stuff tonight. It's just hard to believe. So anyway, in terms of the ceremony itself, pretty rough. Pretty rough. Now, on the plus side, that extremely upsetting bit did do a lot to move the ceremony along. This thing happened in under 3 hours and 10 minutes, I think. Right? Like they got the whole ceremony done in under 3 hours. It was like 3 hours 5 minutes, something very very close to 3 hours. So it did actually make it for an efficient show, just at great cost to the content.
Well,
So
and some of that efficiency, I will say, came from obviously, the studio. Seth Rogen won 3 Emmys, so by the time he goes up for the third or fourth, it's like, okay, we don't have that much more to say. It kind of shifts some of the narrative around that. But no, I mean, like nobody wasn't there, right? Everybody accepted an Emmy. There were actually the full number of speeches. So I think that from that perspective, like there was, yeah, like if you look at it from the point of view, it's very possible there's an interview of producers tomorrow where they're just like, hey, the system worked, the show came in close to time, we don't know what the problem is. And I don't want to believe that anybody could be that naive and to have that little self-awareness. But at the same time, like from their perspective, what is their goal? Is their goal to deliver a show close to time that people are talking about the next morning? Well, guess what? People are going to talk about it. And so from that perspective, we'll see what the ratings look like. CBS Emmys are always slightly higher rated because CBS's audience still watches broadcast TV. and none of the other networks do. And so it always pikes up a little bit. And
Right.
like, are the Emmys back? It's like, nope, they're just on CBS this year. But I think that we'll kind of get a better sense of how the ceremony went over once normal people and not us talk about it. But it was not for us. That's very clear.
Yeah, yeah. If you're just joining us, I'm David Chen from Decoding TV, the podcast and YouTube channel. Joining me today is Myles McNutt. Check out his newsletter, Episodic Medium, at episodicmedium.tv. We're discussing the 2025 Emmy Awards. So, Myles, let's talk about the awards themselves. We're not going to run down exhaustively every single thing that won, but let's just talk about overall what we thought of the awards. Here is my thought. A little something for everyone. I thought most of the ones that got awards were very, very deserving. A handful of true upsets, true like shocking upsets, which is fun, and then like kind of like everyone got a little bit of love. Like it wasn't just like one show got everything. Everyone got a little bit of love. That was my reaction. Myles, what do you think?
Yes, that's true. And I mean, like, we've seen some real sweeps in recent years. And I think that you saw sort of a sense that there was both in comedy and in drama two clear frontrunners, right? Both of which won multiple awards in major contexts. I do think that obviously the studio came very close to sweeping
Yeah,
relatively,
yeah,
given that it won both writing and directing, as well as actor and as well as series. That's not surprising given the trend. It is now officially the winningest comedy in Emmy history. It won more awards than The Bear did for its first season, and as a result, has now an actual comedy now holds that title. If we want to go by technicality from that perspective, but at the same time, part of the reason
it turns
why
out when
this
you actually make a really good, funny comedy, it can compete against a show like The Bear. I'm not
that
trying to
being
insult the other comedies that are competing against The Bear, but yeah, it's nice to see an actual comedy win the comedy series award. That's nice. Sorry, Myles, go
And
ahead.
I do think that no, but in addition to that, though, like about that studio, the studio won all those awards because it is a quote unquote cinematic comedy, right? It's the
Mm,
oneers, it's the conspicuous cinematography, broadly speaking. And so, like, in a lot of ways, it still is not really a traditional kind of, framework for that. But obviously, Gene Smart and Hannah Einbinder winning reflects a very clear desire that Hacks is still something the Academy likes, even if this year they wanted to go in the direction of the most navel gazing show instead of the next most navel gazing show in terms of understanding Hollywood and its frameworks. And then I think in the drama side, obviously, I think coming in the Pit and Severance was the battle that was sort of emerging. I think Severance, coming off of its first season, was a very clear Emmy show that just kind of got caught up in the Succession era, where it didn't really get a chance to kind of find its way through these categories. And so what I think is interesting about that is obviously it didn't win series, the Pitt won series. It didn't win actor. And obviously Adam Scott is giving maybe the most conspicuous performance in that show as these sort of dueling
right.
versions of this character. But what I will say is that notably, Britt Lauer and Tremel Tillman, neither were nominated for season one. And so
Mm,
these are two performers who were kind of ignored in that first season, where the bigger actors were kind of acknowledged, but then got nominations this year and both won their categories. This clearly indicates like the Academy watched this show, right? They
mm,
saw those performances, which are not the buzziest, which are not the starriest. And they said, those are the ones we're going to acknowledge, despite the presence of your White Lotus stars and supporting actor, despite the presence of Kathy Bates, who would have been a deserving winner for Matlock, do not get me wrong, but who would have been a more traditional sort of way of thinking about it. So even though you could look and say, hey, Severance, they spent 3 years trying to make this season of television. It took them like 18 months or something to film it. And they put all this work in, and it's so just like, all these things, and it wasn't awarded in those big categories. And yet two of its performers who really elevated their work in season two were clearly seen. And I think that as a result, you can look at that as a win for both, even if this is a much bigger win for a show like The Pit, for the idea of a medical drama in this day and age, for a more traditional idea of TV. And obviously, as much as Noah Wiley's win represents that, Kathleen Lanas's win for supporting actress, coming from nowhere, right? Coming in,
right.
you'd think, okay, Noah Wiley's leading a medical show. He's probably getting nominated. I don't think anybody before that show premiered would have ever thought Catherine Lanasa would be in that conversation.
Yeah, I mean, have to acknowledge Kathleen Nasa, who is either my favorite or second favorite character of that show. She is Noah Wiley is the kind of the leading man, the sort of the what do you call it? It's the flashiest part. He gets to do the most acting, but Catherine Lanasa is the beating heart of that show, The Pitch. She does a wonderful job, and I'm so happy to see somebody like that acknowledged. So let's talk about some of the bigger upsets. Catherine Lanasa is definitely one of the bigger upsets. I was pretty stunned when that happened. Not only that, by the way, but I believe, despite receiving something on the order of, I'm going to say 750 award nominations, I think the White Lotus was completely shut out tonight. Is that right? Like, I don't recall seeing a
That
single
is
White
correct.
Lotus win. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it turns out when you submit / nominate 4 people for one category in one show, they might take the votes away from each other. You know, like they might not be the best strategy for winning awards for that show. And Kathleen Lanasa beat out 4 supporting actresses in the White Lotus to win for Best Supporting Actress in a Drama Series. Myles, in our nominations talk 2 months ago here on the Decoding TV podcast, we discussed the White Lotus dilemma, and it seems like it really didn't go well for them. Any thoughts on the White Lotus getting completely shut out?
Look, I would have been fine. You know, I think your two front runners in supporting actor and actress from The White Lotus would have been Carrie Coon and Walton Goggins. I think both would have been deserving winners of that award. I want to be very clear on that point. I think the simple truth is that, you know, limiting my theory is always limit to 2 per category per
Yes.
show. I think we can accept that 2 people in a supporting role could be relevant in that case. I'm totally on board with that in context. Not only does it create more representation in the category, but it also gives the people in the show a better chance.
Yes.
Because it's
Yes.
possible if you're not splitting that 4 ways and going for that. But like we see vote splitting in other contexts, both writing and directing. You know, you had The Pit and Severance competing with multiple different nominees in those categories, and neither show won either. And I think that that indicates some of that happening in these environments. But I think just in general, it's like you look at, you know, on the comedy side, a supporting actor in a comedy is maybe with the other surprise we can talk about with Jeff
Yeah.
Hiller's win. And like that's a great example of a category that is pulling from a wide range of different shows, right? Where you've got a couple double nominees from
Right.
shows that are well represented, et cetera, but you really are pulling from these directions. Jeff Hiller was such a surprise nominee that like social media posts that went up about the category didn't have his headshot. Like, I'm sure those poor people were just like, "Wait a minute, what? I don't have that at hand. I gotta post now. If I don't post now, it's not gonna go to blind top grade." Like, this was like nobody was prepared for this. And then the idea, there's like this fundamental Emmy ideal that you could get nominated by complete surprise, and then all of a sudden, people who otherwise wouldn't have even looked at your performance are going to see it. And that once you are seen, you are admired, and once you're admired, you are rewarded. That is like this platonic ideal of how this system should work. And it's like, do we want more categories where more opportunities like that emerge? Like, what would have happened if you cut those 2 White Lotus people and say some of the Andor actors get in,
Yeah.
right, to the supporting drama categories, right? What happens if you start to see performances that might have been overlooked based on genre, based on just the like lack of recognition for the show, based on what network it was on, et cetera? And what if they could be seen and then in the process rewarded? That's what we should be aiming for, right? But the reason why no network is going to support that is because then HBO would have had fewer nominations. And HBO's whole goal is to get more nominations than
Right.
Netflix so they can assert dominance. Like it's just a dick measuring contest when it comes to nominations. And who wins, right? Ultimately, you know, obviously Max's HBO Max, whatever you want to call it, the consortium in process, is not mad about the results from tonight's Emmys. But at the end of the day, there's this idea that that battle is worth whatever consequences it has. And I think The White Lotus is a definite victim of that.
Totally. So just to be clear, Jeff Hiller won for Best Supporting Actor in a Comedy Series for Somebody Somewhere, and he beat out the studio's Ike Barinholtz, the Four Seasons Coleman Domingo, Shrinking's Harrison Ford, The Bears' Ibn Mas Baccarat, and Shrinking's Michael Urie, as well as Saturday Night Live's Bowen Yang. So that is 4 or 5 people I know more in terms of their name recognition than Jeff Hiller. Truly astonishing, and as you say, indicates that sometimes the Emmys can recognize sheer acting talent over star power. So a really nice win in that category. On that note, I got to say the upset surprise that I was most excited by this evening was I don't know how much of an upset this was, but for me, I would not have expected this one to win, which is Krista Milioti for the Penguin, and she was incredible in that show. It's obviously a superhero genre show, but it's a really unbelievable performance, and I'm so glad that it received recognition. Looked like when she was giving the speech, she didn't believe that she had won. And so, yeah, that's one I wanted to point out as being a real surprise. So those were like three of the biggest surprises of the evening: Catherine Lanasa, Krista Milioti, as well as Jeff Hiller. And anything else for upset? I think that's mostly it. Let me know if I'm missing something. Otherwise, we can just talk about some of the other big. Oh, I'll also say, um, Adam Randall winning Best Directing for a Drama Series for Slow Horses. I think that's the only award they won this night. But yeah, Slow Horses, great TV show, one of the most consistently entertaining shows that you can watch on Apple TV Plus. The premiere is right around the corner, and it was cool to see a Slow Horses win as well. So those were some like really big upsets because it was going up against Andor, The Pit, Severance, and The White Lotus, right? Like those are some heavy hitters. But as I said, a little bit something for everybody. We got a little bit of win for Andor, right? Andor won a nice win, and we got some acting awards for some different categories and so on. But yeah, the big winners of the evening were The Pit, The Studio, Adolescence, and that's mostly it. It hacks to a lesser. Everyone else mostly got like one or two wins, right? Like, but it was mostly the Pit, The Studio, and Adolescence. Those are where I felt like dominated the evening. Myles, any thoughts on kind of some of the bigger winners, some of the more obvious sort of winners for the night?
I mean, like, I think I said it. I think The Pit is so clearly this, like, return back to a different kind of television. The
Yeah.
Pit is going to air every year. It's going to air
Yes.
15 episodes in a streaming environment. Like, this is an example of something that the industry is obviously rallying behind. Over the summer, I built an online version of a TV class, and I had two friends of mine who came in and who talked to me about the course, and they were independent of each other. We're sort of like talking about the future of TV, where things are heading. This is someone who works in development and a TV writer. They both were like, the Pit is the future. The Pit is the hope, right? And I think like it's clear if that's the insight, if that's the instinct within the industry, I think it's very representative of where they want that to be and where they want to go. So I think that's definitely part of what's happening.
Let's clarify what you're talking about for those who may not fully understand, right? Which is that the problem with a lot of television right now is there's only a few episodes, between 6 and 13 episodes per season. And the seasons happen really, really far apart, like sometimes years, 3 years, 4 years between seasons. And that is not only challenging artistically, it's challenging for fans of the show. It's also challenging economically for Hollywood, where people who rely on this work to make ends meet, they cannot depend on working for Severance if they're only going to make like one season every 4 years, right? So I'm exaggerating slightly, but not that much. And so to have a show like The Pit, which is going to air consistently every single year, I think it was 15 episodes season 1, right? Like 15 episodes. It's a whole bunch of episodes. If they can make that model come back and work, it would be a huge deal. So I'm glad that it is getting the recognition that it deserves. Also, it's a great show. It's not like this is like a pity award. It's a great show. It's a great show. It's not bad in any regard. Yeah.
No, I mean, I think in the swing where it's like, you kind of look at Noah Wiley's win, and it's like, look, at the end of the day, that season of The Pit is it's designed to serve that character and his emotional trauma and these elements. But Wiley nails it, right? Wiley is the anchor. As much as I agree Lanasa is the beating heart, like Wiley, there is this presence that he brings to that carries this show that is a large ensemble that I think we're going to see next season, next year's Emmys. I think we'll see more of that ensemble get nominations. I think we'll kind of see them sort of acknowledge this as an awards and prestige show in an even bigger way. Although with Lanasa coming back, I think she's probably still a front runner. And I would say just in terms of like, you mentioned Kristen Milioti, like the thing is like, that was the one category Adolescence wasn't competing in, So we talk about like the dynamics of that sweep, which I think was sort of, like, Stephen Graham beat Colin Farrell, right? Obviously, this was a case where that show was really connecting. The Emmys love nothing more than a Netflix limited series that they can just kind of sweep across the board. But it's also very clear, again, to the point at hand, like Adolescence is a technical showcase in addition to being a performance driven show. So
Right.
it's the one shot thing, it's the cinematography, it's all those factors. But then you look at the episode Owen Cooper and Aaron Doherty both won for, it's just two people in a room talking. And it's just about their interactions and about the kind of nature of that. And so it's very theatrical. It's very much in these traditions. And so I look at that and think, look, that show was always going to kind of march through those categories. It created, honestly, as much as the boys and girls stuff was bad, maybe the cringiest moment of the broadcast for me was when they sent out Elizabeth Banks with a whole statement. And obviously, Elizabeth Banks, a female director herself, for her to stand there and talk about how there was a directing category with all women but one man for limited series or TV movie. And I'm sitting there and I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, but okay, but isn't the one man the one who directed Adolescence, aka who is 100% going to win this category? Like the women that are otherwise nominated have no chance of winning. Like we know this is what's going to happen. Why would you set her up to make this whole deal about where it's like woman, 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 one man at the end, and then have her have to give the Emmy to the man? Like, did we really not think that
Well,
through enough?
first of all, she didn't. No one knew who was going to win prior to the event of the show, right?
They did.
So
They knew. They knew. They
no,
knew.
I
Okay.
saw the Ernst and Young people with the suitcases, and
Well,
they protect all that information, so no one knows. Now, they might have suspected Miles. They might have thought it's very possible that Adolescence is going to win, but yes, you're right. That's like remember when with was the what was it? Was it the Oscars that happened during COVID and they thought that Chadwick Boseman was going to win, right?
Yep.
But instead it was Anthony Hopkins and he wasn't there, and that's how the show ended, and that was really dispiriting. If I recall correctly, I think that's right?
Yes, that was correct.
Uh,
And they moved Best Actor. They moved Best
they moved it
Actor
to the end
last award.
because they were like, we're built, So basically, I'm saying, Miles, sometimes you think something's going to happen. Doesn't happen that way. So that's exactly, I think, how that category played out. But yes, you're right. They could have taken steps to make sure it wasn't embarrassing like it was, for sure. And they didn't do that. So on that point, I will agree with you. But anyway, what else to mention about the night's winners? If you're just joining us, by the way, we're broadcasting live at youtube.com/@decodingtv. We've got 60 people in the room with us tonight. If you have any questions, let us know. We'll answer, respond to them. And I do want to point out, of course, I'm David Chen from Decoding TV, and Myles McNutt's joining me to chat about this telecast. And you can find his work at episodicmedium.tv. Let's see, what else to say about the winners of the night? The one thing I kept thinking about during the telecast was that there would be a really good episode about the studio that has to deal with this specific issue of one show winning too many awards and then needing to give a different speech every single time. That would be good fodder for an episode of the studio, and I hope they make something like that.
I will say it was also fodder for a newsletter I wrote after the Oscars because Sean Baker had to give 4 speeches at the Academy
Right.
Awards just earlier this year, and I thought he managed that so well.
Mhm.
Where it's just sort of like every speech was specific to what it was, none were too long. He felt like he had a point with each of them that was
Right.
like adding to the overall kind of statement he was making. It never felt like he was trying to crowd the space. It very much, gave that idea of like an indie auteur who wasn't really in the limelight, who wasn't approaching it from that perspective. I don't think Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg did a bad job, to be
Right.
clear, but I think that like it helps that like Seth Rogen himself acknowledged like he can't be sincere, right? Like it's not really built for sincerity. It's built to kind of manage that. I will say that I did see some frustration. I will acknowledge on social media that nobody for the studio thanked Sal Saperstein.
Yeah, absolutely.
Seeing the studio, there's a Golden Globes episode, which for
Yeah.
the record, if we had like 3 hours on this podcast, I could rant about the lack of verisimilitude in elements of that awards, which really did break my sense of illusion.
That
And
is
they
pure
should have taken.
that's not even bonus episode material, Miles. That is like you need to be in the founding tier, the founders tier of both of our newsletters to
Oh,
get access to that rant that you just
scene
yeah.
by scene breakdown, shot by shot. And for the record, they did do it in the actual ballroom, so they got that part.
Yeah.
But that episode is like, I think those moments, and then this again is where it's sort of like, is this a show for people who watch the shows in question, right? If they had thanked Sal Saperstein, it would have been an inside joke for the people who watch the studio. We have no idea how many people watch the studio. We truly do not know, right, where that fits in the hierarchy of shows. I guarantee you it is way less people than we think it is, and way less than it seems, operating in the circles that we do. And again, this is a longstanding critique of these awards, of any award show from a TV perspective, which is that ultimately it's like, hey, if somebody watching this doesn't subscribe to HBO Max and doesn't subscribe to Apple TV Plus, they've seen none of this, right? Like,
Yeah.
and like, yes, you gotta think like Adolescence was a huge success for Netflix. That feels like the one populist win that really sort of generated here. But even Andor, right, was among the least watched of the Star Wars shows, right?
Yeah.
Like, as much as it feels so vital, and as much as that win felt so good for a show that was, I think, unfairly ignored in other categories and just clearly didn't gain the momentum that it needed, the very notion that like nobody watched these things, right? In the grand scheme of things, and they keep doing this each year where they have those like tributes to shows that are celebrating anniversaries. So you have Golden Girls, you did Gilmore Girls, which
I
I
know
really
one way of getting the youths back into these award shows, Miles. It's let's spend several minutes doing a tribute to Golden Girls. I think that's to inject some relevancy, some cultural relevance back into the mix. That is what how you do it, I think. Um,
and but no, like all these are history points still, but they're history points of the mid 2000s where broadcast TV mattered, right? So, which is why I at least appreciated that when the Gilmore Girls patter, which I still don't know, like part of me wonders if Amy Sherman Palladino wrote it. It was probably the best writing of the night. I thought it was sharp. It reminded me of the rhythms of that show, but I appreciated that they acknowledged that nobody watched it, that it had no budget, that they were acknowledging something that would have been, it was ignored at the time. Lauren Graham quite famously never got an Emmy nomination for that show, to the point they tried to change the rules so she could get an Emmy nomination for that show, and the Emmys nominated Kevin James instead. So, there's a whole Blue Ribbon Committee panel, which again, that's for the late after dark of the show that we could go for like the
yeah.
real extreme subscribers. But like the whole idea there is like we need to acknowledge that like the things we remember, the things we memorialize, were often niche at the time, right? That, in my mind, 20 years from now, we should be reuniting the cast of Andor on that stage. Even though it only won that singular Emmy, we should be like, hey, the Star Wars show on Disney Plus offered the most trenchant commentary on our political moment. Like, let's acknowledge that, even though Emmy voters seemingly were just like, Star Wars sci-fi, not doing it. Right? Like, so like we need to sort of accept that the narrative of who wins Emmys, which wasn't bad this year. Like, I don't mind this narrative, etc. Doesn't really reflect necessarily where TV is or where TV is going. And so ultimately it's just kind of, why do we go through this exercise, you sometimes ask? And it's just like, well, because at the end of the day,
Just every
the
day.
industry,
Yeah.
every day, the industry needs this contest to kind of like to present themselves and to engage with it. And we use it because we want to be validated and because we want for those wins, someone like Jeff Hiller, a show like Andor, where it feels like we won. And I do think that there were some moments like that this year. And there were no moments where I felt completely like, ugh, really? That's what's winning here. And I figure in the grand scheme of things, that sounds like a win to me. At the end of the day, broadcast aside.
It's true. In general, most people don't watch a lot of these shows, and if they do, we can't know how many people did because we don't have the actual numbers. We just have what Nielsen measures and what the studios decide to release, which is often very vague. But it does seem extremely likely that, let's say, 100 times more people watched Jake Paul fighting Mike Tyson than watched Severance, right? And This is the world that we live in. All right, let's do a few of the comments and questions from the chat room, and then we'll wrap up here. Munib Khan in the chat says, "Will The Bear finally move to the drama category next year?" Myles McNutt, your prediction for this?
No, and I think that's mainly because I think everybody sort of understands that its time is over. I don't think moving to drama would help it. I don't think staying in comedy will hurt it. I think it will just keep pulling some nominations. And then that's all really FX sees it as. Its career momentum is gone. Nothing about the Bears' fourth season at all adjusted to or addressed any of the criticisms of the third. And so unless there's a major course correction plan for a fifth, I think they're just going to stick it out, and FX will shift its attention in the drama category to. I don't see Alien Earth getting a whole lot of love at that level, given the genre factor. But they do have Ethan Hawke in the Lowdown coming up here in a couple weeks, so I do think they're going to kind of hedge their bets there and just kind of pick up those legacy nominations in comedy to boost Disney's overall corporate total.
Mikey Turnbent in the chat says Severance felt a little left out in the cold. I agree. It didn't win a lot of the major categories, but it did win for Britt Lower, who I thought was wonderful in the season. And also Tremel Tillman, who I believe is the first Black actor to win Best Supporting Actor in a drama series ever, if I'm not mistaken. So, and those were both wonderful performances. They did a great job. So, yeah, it certainly could have won more, but I'm really glad it won the awards that it did. Let's see. Ben Wezerick writes, "It was nice to feel everyone in the auditorium rooting for Colbert." And that was cool. It was cool to see Colbert acknowledging that his show has, and not only his show, the institution itself that he inhabited has been canceled. We don't know, but likely due to some political pressure. And the fact that the award ceremony was happening on CBS was notable, I think. On that note, by the way, it always feels weird watching these things on CBS, Miles, because most of the shows that are winning awards are not broadcast shows. So it continues to be like CBS is broadcasting the oncoming of its own irrelevance, which is very odd,
Well, we actually, it's called the Carousel. So this is the rights deal that the broadcast networks make with the TV Academy. It's called the Carousel. It rotates between the four broadcast networks. And the idea is that, that deal was renewed. I forget when it was last renewed, but at the time, I talked to people in the industry, and they're just like, look, we all kind of said this is stupid. Why are we continuing to do this? But the issue is, award shows still are a better bet than most other forms of programming.
Just in terms of ratings. They still do.
In terms of ratings.
Despite how unwatchable they sometimes can be, the ratings are sometimes still solid. They are one of the last monoculture events that we have. But it's like a serial killer forcing you to hold a sign saying how great they are. That's like, hey, that's like Netflix winning a bunch of awards, at the Emmys tonight, right?
And to be fair, they were closer than they have been in a very long time with Kathy Bates. Right? That reasonably, she had a very good chance at winning that award.
I like how you're saying this for one category. They had
for one singular category.
A chance that they lost.
And that's not going to change next year. All of the programs that you saw advertised during this awards have no chance at Emmy recognition. This is just the path that they're on. This is where they're heading. I will say about that, in terms of understanding the carousel and sort of looking at what CBS is doing, I will agree that the Stephen Colbert love was notable. Again, I think I saw somebody, I think Dan Feinberg said, I don't know if the Emmy actual auditorium has ever been that excited about someone winning an award ever.
Right.
It really felt like if he hadn't won that award, that the crowd would have rioted. It really felt like it would have been a dangerous situation for Jimmy Kimmel. I'm not sure he would have left the auditorium alive. But I will also say, I also did appreciate the boos for the end of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which I think for a show that largely was avoiding politics in a very traditional way. And I think even obviously, other than Hannah Einbinder, who did actively, say Free Palestine and sort of speak out against ICE in her speech that was obviously in America censored in the mid part. But in that environment, I will say that it's interesting that the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, that's a political statement, right? For the TV Academy to make that claim about the end of public broadcasting and the threat against it in those environments, for the room to respond the way it did, that's a meaningful moment. That felt good. but at the same time, it's also like, okay, like what are they going to do about it, right? Like the statements every time the TV Academy president talks about this, where it's just like, culture, it's so important. And it's like, yeah, but all the corporations who just won these awards, what are they doing about it? Like, what's Apple TV doing to fill the gap, right? Like, are any of these tech companies spending billions on content to sell toilet paper, right? Are they going to do anything to step in and try to address this gap in educational programming or a gap in local programming? The answer is no. So it does seem like we're celebrating an industry that is maybe not necessarily as reflective of that room as we might want it to be in terms of how they're approaching this.
Well, if there's one thing we've learned from the last year, it's that celebrity endorsements move the needle considerably when it comes to elections and other important matters of public policy, Myles McNutt. So, I think they don't need to do anything. I think just saying stuff is enough, personally. But that's me, that's me. Anyway, let's wrap up here. I will say there was one comment. I was being sarcastic, by the way. Cody Flicks in the chat says, I did enjoy CTV in Canada allowing the F-bombs to make it to air. There were a few F-bombs during the show. Aaron Doherty, we're going to say the F-bombs now in this podcast/video. Aaron Doherty in the chat said, thank you to the Academy. You're all fucking stunning. That got bleeped out. John Oliver said, fuck you, Nate Bargatze. That's a lot of money to you. You can add the fucks to the swear jar. That got bleeped out. And Hannah Einbinder in her award speech said, go Birds, fuck ICE, and free Palestine. Which I think we can all agree is incredibly upsetting. I will not stomach any promotion of the Philadelphia Eagles on any national broadcast. And that is where I draw the line. That's going to bring us into this podcast episode about the 2025 Emmy Awards. I'm David Chen. Joining me today was Myles McNutt from Episodic Medium. Check out his work at episodicmedium.tv. Myles McNutt, thank you so much, as usual, for chatting with me today.
Thank you, Dave.